Final Fantasy VII is one of the most celebrated video games of all time. But is it still worth playing today? And should you play the original game before the remake or the other way around? This video will answer these questions. Final Fantasy VII is a classic Japanese RPG where you control a party of 3 characters from a total of 9. Initially, your choice of characters is limited by the story, but you'll eventually be free to form a party of your choosing. The party explores fields and dungeons with pre-rendered backgrounds, while battles play out in 3-dimensional environments featuring a cinematic camera and slightly more detailed character models. This is the first 3D title in the series and it shows, but some of the visuals still look surprisingly good today. Combat uses the active time battle system, a real-time turn-based hybrid where characters take turns as their action bars fill up over time. Characters can choose to attack, cast spells, or use items or special abilities. For the first time in the series, the heroes also have access to limit breaks, big, splashy, ultimate attacks that become available after the character takes enough damage. Combat takes place mostly in random encounters, and there are a lot of them. There isn't a lot of strategic depth to the combat system, but the game offers a ton of freedom in character customization through the Materia system. Characters can be equipped with different types of materia to give them access to spells and abilities or boost their attributes. Materia can also be combined for even more potent effects, and since materia levels up independently and can be traded back and forth between the heroes, you're free to tinker with your setup. The game's story follows Cloud Strife, a former corporate soldier turned sword for hire, who joins an eco-terrorist group called Avalanche that's fighting to bring down the oppressive Shinra Electric Company, whose aggressive extraction of Mako energy from the planet's core is destroying the world. The story gets off to a fast start but has a rich backstory revealed through dialogue and flashbacks. This is a complex tale built around universal themes like environmentalism, corporate greed, and personal identity. The story is full of mystery and has some really great twists. The characters are fun and memorable and all have strong personalities. Each of them also has their own story to tell, and some of the hardest hitting scenes come from these smaller personal tales. There's no voice acting, the dialogue has its weak spots, and the story drags a bit around the middle, but for the most part the story still holds up wonderfully, and the best scenes are just as gripping today. Another thing that holds up is the game's soundtrack. Nobuo Uematsu's score is a cinematic masterpiece that's dramatic, melancholic, and foreboding as the need arises. It's pure magic and it makes every scene that much stronger. Final Fantasy VII is a unique mix of fantasy, sci-fi, and modern aesthetics. It's a world of neon-lit shantytowns, commuters crowding into train cars, and office high-rises glittering in the night sky. The heroes battle private security, suit-wearing thugs, and greedy corporate overlords. It's a world as fascinating as it is relatable. The game does a great job of mixing things up to keep them from getting stale. Dungeons are usually short, and the scenarios are varied and surprising, with everything from card chases to wilderness survival and much more. You never know what's coming next. The early game takes place in the city of Midgar, but after about 4 to 5 hours, the story opens up with a large world map to explore. This is a mostly linear game, but it does a great job of helping you forget that you're on rails. Once you reach the final dungeon, the game really opens up, with tons of secrets and bonus content to do. There's weapons and materia to collect, limit breaks to learn, super bosses to challenge, and tons of minigames to play. Expect to spend about 30 to 40 hours with the game on your first time through. But that's just to finish the story. To do everything the game has to offer, you're looking at upwards of 70 to 80 hours in total. You should play this game if you enjoy classic JRPGs with a great story and lots of side content. Or play the game to experience an important part of gaming history and see where characters like Cloud, Aerith, and Sephiroth came from. Final Fantasy VII is available on Steam, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch, and there are versions for iOS and Android too. With the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you might be wondering which game you should play first, the original or the remake. Before I get into that, I'd be super grateful if you could hit the like button and leave a quick comment, as it really helps the video reach more people. And if you want to support me, consider subscribing. As it stands right now, the remake only covers about 15% of the original game. The sequels are expected to complete the story eventually, but that could be as much as 10 years down the line. Playing the original first will spoil the overall story of the remake, but not as much as you might think. The remake adds a bunch of new stuff that wasn't in the original, and while the remake stays true to the original game's story, it does make some key changes. In many ways, Final Fantasy VII Remake was made for fans of the original game, and adds a whole other layer to the experience if you've already played Final Fantasy VII. Playing the remake first will spoil the first 4 or 5 hours of the original game, and there are some hints of things to come later down the line. Aside from the story, these are two wildly different games. My recommendation is, if you're new to the series or prefer action RPGs, play the remake first. If you're a big fan of classic turn-based RPGs, go for the original. There's also a third option on the horizon. Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis is an upcoming reimagining of Final Fantasy VII that stays closer to the game's roots. Ever Crisis will retell the story of Final Fantasy VII as well as other canon titles in the same world, including the movie Advent Children and games like Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus. Ever Crisis is being developed for iOS and Android and is scheduled for release sometime in 2022, potentially making this a great way for modern audiences to enjoy the story of Final Fantasy VII. That said, this will be an episodic, free-to-play mobile game with loot boxes, so I'm gonna keep my guard up until we know more. If you want to learn more about why Final Fantasy VII was such a big deal, check out my retrospective video essay. Fair warning, that video is 30 minutes long and contains a lot of spoilers.